Hello, my name is Jose.
And my name is Yona.
In this video, we'll be taking an in-depth look at the intriguing theory of classical conditioning and its relation towards learning and behavior. In order to accomplish this, we will describe classical conditioning and how this theory relates to the learning process.
Furthermore, we will also investigate the culminating ideas and history supporting this theory so as to properly express the mechanics and workings of this theory. Ultimately, this will be done in order to demonstrate how classical conditioning can be conducive to learning situations within a classroom setting.
Classical conditioning affects our everyday life. Here's the Simpsons' take on classical conditioning.
I propose to determine the answer to the question, is my brother dumber than a hamster?
Hey, Elise, look what I can do. Doggone it.
Remarkable.
Stupid books. Hey, a cupcake. Uh, uh. Uh-huh.
Hamster 1, Bart 0. Experiment 2. The food is connected to a mild electrical current. The hamster has learned a valuable lesson. Beware the hand of man.
Oh, a wise guy, eh? Ow! Ow! Ow!
Hamster 2, Bart 0.
Now, if any of you ever...
I love you.
Bart, could you go get the cupcakes? Cupcakes, cupcakes. Yes, sweet cakes for all.
Around the year 1900, Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov was studying the role of saliva in the digestive processes of dogs when he came across what he called psychic reflexes. Like many discoveries, his was in part accidental. Pavlov would present meat to a dog and then collect the resulting saliva for testing. But while conducting his research, he began to notice that dogs accustomed to this procedure would actually start salivating before he presented them with the meat powder. For instance, they would salivate in response to a clicking sound made by the device that was used to present the meat powder. Pavlov decided to investigate further by pairing the meat powder with various stimuli. For instance, in some experiments, he used a simple auditory stimulus, that is, the presentation of a tone. After the tone and the meat powder had been presented together at a number of times, the tone was presented alone. What happened? Well, the dogs responded by salivating to the sound of the tone alone.
Now, let's take a look at the underlying and key features of classical conditioning. According to Lethbridge, pairing of natural and artificial stimuli enough times will eventually elicit a particularly learned response. Therefore, in the process of classical conditioning, it is necessary to properly articulate and distinguish the relationship and transformation of the nature of stimuli. Therefore, three stages that we must consider key to classical conditioning are preconditioning, conditioning, and postconditioning. So now let's take a look at Pavlov's original experiment on dogs to elaborate on the processing of stimuli. In the first phase, known as preconditioning, what we will notice is that the dog is presented with food and begins to salivate. The stimuli in this case is the food. It would be attributed as being an unconditioned stimulus because it evokes a reaction, being sight and smell. Furthermore, the natural response or unconditioned response in this case would be the dog's salivation. However, if another stimulus, like a bell, is introduced simultaneously prior to and during this conditioning stage, the dog will eventually begin to associate the bell with food, and this in return will transform the bell into a conditioned stimulus. Following the conditioning stage is the post-conditioning stage. and what will emerge is that the dog will begin to salivate at the sound of the bell. Therefore, salivation at this stage is no longer a natural reflexive response, rather it becomes a conditioned response, as it was learned through association with the conditioned stimulus, i.e. the bell. As we have seen through Pavlov's stages of classical conditioning, our behavior are shaped by our environment. Moreover, as human beings, we already possess instinctual qualities that are pre-learned to engage with our surroundings. Effectively, the manner in which people engage with their environment and behavior is through responses brought about by stimuli. A stimuli is a thing that elicits a specific bodily function or reaction. A classic example of this is illustrated in the image that demonstrates someone touching a hot stove and then quickly pulling their hand back. Effectively, the stimulus, or the hot stove, evokes this instinctual response. However, not all stimuli or responses are naturally occurring, as demonstrated. And as Hefner underscores, we develop responses to certain stimuli that are not naturally occurring. This means that behaviors and responses to certain stimuli must be learned. Learning is a process of reappropriating and reorganizing stimuli to evoke an intended response. Whereas Lethbridge highlights, behavior is a struggle between the natural and artificial stimuli in evoking a response.
What does classical conditioning look like in the classroom? Well, in language learning, Pavlov's and Skinner's behaviorist theories inspired the audio-lingual method, where teachers drill grammatical sentence patterns to second language learners through the process of conditioning. That is, they help learners respond correctly to certain stimuli through shaping and reinforcement. Basically, this method focused on improving students' oral proficiency in the target language. One of the techniques that we use in our classroom to control student behavior, and that relates back to classical conditioning, is the flickering of lights to indicate to our students that they need to quiet down. So based on the example that was just given with regards to the technique that we use in our classroom, we can notice a couple of assumptions that are outlined here in the chart from our readings. So the focus on observable events, in this case the stimuli is the flickering of the lights and the response is the students quieting down. We notice a behavior change in the learning process. There's also a contiguity of events. The flickering of the lights at the same time or close together in time, the students respond by being quiet. Classical conditioning plays an important role in shaping our emotional responses, for example, fears or phobias. Students who feel anxiety in certain subjects in school may generalize it to other aspects of their learning, for example, generalization. We have the example of a student who struggles with long division in math and may generalize that to feel anxiety in all other aspects of math. As teachers, we must create classrooms that will elicit responses of enjoyment and relaxation instead of anxiety and fear. How can we do this? Well, one way is by incorporating positive imagery in our classroom and also using humor. We can extinguish negative emotional responses that students exhibit by gradually introducing the stimulus when the student is happy and relaxed. This is a process called extinction. To end off our PowerPoint, we would like to suggest a few principles of classical conditioning and how you can use them in the classroom. We were particularly inspired by the three suggestions that were made by Ormond and others in 2010 in our course readings. They outlined the three following ways. So create a positive learning environment in the classroom. Be sure that students associate success with all areas of the curriculum. When a particular subject or task arouses anxiety in students, present it slowly and gradually while they are happy and relaxed and ensure that they are successful.